You're gonna have a choice between lotions and sprays. And between the two, I would never buy. Hi friends, which sunscreen is best? It's not what you think. There are thousands of sunscreen options, but really, are they all safe? Today, people lather or spray synthetic chemicals that can be inhaled in the lungs, absorbed through the eyes and the skin to interact with your immunity, disturb the environment, and collect in aquatic animals that people eat. And yes, we can add sunscreen to the list that can do all those things. But the fact is, millions of people are getting diagnosed with skin cancer that is directly related to sun exposure. And there is no 100% solution that's foolproof, unless you're gonna be a hermit, which has its own health problems. We all need sunlight. However, we do know if you spend enough time in the sun, you will 100% get sunburn. So there's going to be a trade-off. Sunscreen is not like food. All of it are chemicals designed for you to wear on your skin as a shield against getting radiation. Having said that, there are lots of other things that can reduce the intensity and exposure of UV light from the sun. And sunscreen is just one of several tools for you to layer on for protection. So a better question is, which is safer that will protect you against UV rays? The US is behind in the science of sunscreen ingredients, but we still have some good options. And some people say we need to wear sunscreen all the time, every day, even when we're indoors, due to climbing sun cancer rates. I have friends with dark skin and others who are super fair-skinned. Really? Don't you think those two opposite shades of skin would require different types of skincare protection? Now, those with darker shades of skin have a genetic advantage when it comes to sun protection compared to lighter skin individuals, especially against certain types of skin cancer and photoaging. Now, the sun is the major reason to photoage and to get permanent collagen damage, which translates into thinner skin and more wrinkles earlier, no matter your skin shade. However, it's naive to blame the sun for all the damage. We know that there are other toxins that are actually more damaging, including smoking. The worst wrinkles that I've seen are in people who frequently inhale the chimney exhaust of burning cigarettes. Air pollution is a major factor in a variety of human diseases, including skin conditions. Keep that in mind, as it will be very relevant when it comes to picking sunscreen. Now, the debate is over mineral-based versus chemical-based sunscreens. First of all, buy a professionally made sunscreen. Don't DIY it yourself at home. Making sunscreen is not like baking a cake. The process is highly scientific, and these chemicals are specifically designed to go on smoothly, to block as much surface area as possible, to block the UV light, and it's gone through lots of different testing to make sure that it actually does block the amount of UV radiation that it says on your bottle. UV light is invisible to your naked eye, and you don't know you've made a mistake until you get sunburned or you get DNA damage several years down the line. Would you ever DIY your own sunglasses to protect your eyes? I wouldn't, as the consequences of making a bad filter is irreversible damage to my eyes. And think of sunscreen the same way. Now, I wish it was as easy as telling you to avoid chemical-based sunscreens. Have you seen the laundry list of chemicals in the inactive component of mineral-based sunscreens? Many of those chemicals are not as regulated as the one in the active ingredient list. So while we continue to debate on the safety and efficacy of the active chemicals, the rest of the world are lathering on ingredients that help them to achieve anti-aging goals safely. By the way, did you know that some of the lowest rates of skin cancer in Asia? Now, I'm sure you've heard about Korean skincare products and that they seem to be more advanced than the ones in the US. Well, I don't necessarily think people need to buy Korean skincare products. However, the point is getting new skincare ingredients are challenging in the US because apparently the problem is archaic FDA rules that restricts imports of sunscreen from other countries with newer chemicals unless it's been tested in animals. Now, sunscreen is considered an over-the-counter drug. So lots of companies don't actually test it like a drug. And that's why we don't get the options that are available in other countries. In 2021, the FDA only has 2 ingredients that are listed as a generally recognized as safe list, which are zinc oxide and titanium dioxide. Two have been designated as not generally recognized as safe ingredients, including aminobenzoic acid and trolamine salicylate. In the US, that leaves 12 other ingredients with insufficient data. But these ingredients are still allowed on the market pending additional safety data, which they expect the manufacturers to perform. Well, I wouldn't hold your breath because I don't see that they have an incentive to perform any more safety data since they're already selling their product. The European Commission set a new limit on how much two ingredients, homosalicate and octocrylene, they can be in a product. Now, I literally typed all of these names in the European database, and sure enough, homosalicate and octocrylene came up with some warnings. Now, before we dive into other specific names, let's understand when it's best to use sunscreen and how to use it properly to get the most coverage. Now, the sun gives off UVA and UVB rays that damage and darken your skin. Now, this is all photo damage, which can cause DNA mutations that can lead to skin cancer. And unfortunately, no amount of sunscreen is 100% by itself, especially since most people don't apply it properly. They don't apply enough and they don't reapply often enough. A good rule of thumb is to put sunscreen on like soap. For your face, that's about 1/4 teaspoon to be applied every 2 hours. But if you want to prevent photoaging, it's important to have multiple layers of protection and not just sunscreen. And we'll address other ways to protect your skin a little bit later. Now, I don't know anybody who puts on sunscreen and stays at home, but apparently some people do because you can still get UV radiation. So the first thing that we should all learn to do is to check the UV index, kind of like checking the weather app for the day. In the old days, I used to just look out the window and predict if it's going to rain or be dry. I could do that because I live in Southern California and chances are it's going to be dry. But when the clouds roll in, then I'm not quite sure. Have you ever gone out without sun protection on an overcast day and then realized the next day that you actually got sunburned? And what you needed to do was to check the UV index, which is a measurement of how much UV light the sun was giving off in your area. A UV index level of 3 or above means you need to seek sun protection. That's not just sunblock. The higher UV index, the more damage you will get to your skin. And of course, fair-skinned people would burn at a lower UV index. Early morning before 10 or late afternoon after 4 is when the UV index will be at its lowest. And it's recommended that you go out without sun protection when the UV index is at its lowest, less than 3. Even in Australia, they don't recommend going 24/7 with sunscreen because the sun has helpful light rays that stimulate your body to be healthy. Here is a UV index scale, which you can download on your app, or you can check the website to see when you need to apply sunscreen and when you really need to avoid the sun. Again, the UV index of less than 3 means enjoy the sun without sun protection, even if you're fair skin. That's the safe range. Above a UV index of 3 is really referring to fair skin individuals when you start at 3. They need to use sunscreen at a lower UV index. And it's recommended that you use sunscreen, you seek shade, and you cover up. Over 8, definitely everybody should be avoiding that. The darker your skin tone, the higher your UV index for your skin will be able to tolerate before getting sunburned. Now, unfortunately, when I grew up, my parents didn't know about the UV index and really didn't offer any sunscreen to me. I remember getting sunburned on my shoulders several times at the beach, frolicking in the water. And as an adult, I've been able to avoid sunburns, but it turns out that the skin damage that you get as a child is actually carried into adulthood. Simply put, the people most vulnerable to skin damage or really DNA damage are children. And to be clear, UV damage can occur at any age, but when you get it as a child, it's worse because they have a critical window of long-lasting DNA changes that they will carry with them throughout their adult lives. Now, the global leader in skin cancer rates is Australia, and they have the perfect setup. A country close to the equator, inhabited by lots of fair-skinned individuals who enjoy bathing in the sun. Of course, the closer you live to the equator, the more UV radiation you'll be exposed to. And the time of year also determines your UV index, really how close the Earth is to the sun. So if you're visiting Australia during, let's say, their summer months, which is January, you'll have 7% more sun exposure than if you waited 7 months later and visited them in July. But wherever you're at, just check the UV index before you venture out. Skin cancer rates are much lower in Asian countries. And it's not just because we have darker skin. We actually go out of our way to avoid sun. And hence, many Asians have extremely low vitamin D levels. Now, while the West enjoys activities darkening their skin, like laying out in the sun or a tanning salon that increases their skin cancer rate, Asians, we cover up everything, including our face. Many Asians use the protection against infectious contagions and air pollution as a reason to cover up their face. So obviously, based on your lifestyle, you can achieve a great deal of sun protection without putting on sunscreen. But if you're going to wear a bathing suit and no clothes over it, well, you gotta put sunscreen on if you want to block harmful UV rays. My mom's friend, she used to drive to our house with long sleeve gloves and a plastic face shield as she was driving. And when it comes to protecting your skin, unless you're going to be in a beekeeper suit or a spacesuit, there's just no way to bulletproof against harmful UV rays. In Australia, they say there's 5 different ways to prevent skin cancer: slip, slop, slap, seek, and slide. I would like to add slurp. There are lots of foods and essential nutrients that you can be slurping down that are critical to protecting and repairing your DNA. No amount of sunblock will ever address this. And the power of proper nutrition is greatly underestimated. So how do you choose sunscreen? I'm sure that you look for SPF, sun protection factor, a numerical rating that indicates how well a sunscreen protects skin from UVB radiation, the primary cause of sunburn and a major contributor to skin cancer. Now, the SPF number tells you how much longer you can stay in the sun without burning than if you weren't wearing sunscreen. So for example, if your unprotected skin would burn in 10 minutes, then an SPF 15 theoretically allows 150 minutes of protection, 10 times 15. But this is under the perfect lab condition where you're not sweating, you're just kind of laying there. There is no other factors of water or rubbing against clothes. So likewise, an SPF 30 would allow 300 minutes and so on. But we all know that this isn't realistic. But an SPF of 30, it's supposed to block 97% of the UVB rays as long as it's on your skin. So sunscreen that has an SPF of 50 blocks 98% of UVB rays. And even though it appears only to be 1% higher, you can actually get better protection if you actually looked at the percentage that it doesn't cover. So the SPF 30 only misses 3% of harmful rays, while the SPF 50 only misses 2% of the harmful rays. That 1% appears to be enough to make a difference in better protection. But at the minimum, find a sunscreen that's at least SPF 30. Now, some of you may ask about UVA light, which can also cause skin damage. It actually penetrates deeper. And in America, the sunscreens are labeled as broad spectrum if it also has UVA coverage. So if you're looking for both UVA and UVB coverage, get an SPF at least 30 that also has the word broad spectrum to cover for UVA radiation. Now, if you look at the American Academy of Dermatology Association, their website recommends that when choosing a sunscreen for children under 6 months of age, line 3 literally says minimize sunscreen use on children younger than 6 months of age. Now, when I read that as a new mom, I realized that whether my children were 6 months of age, 6 years of age, 16 or 26, I worry that they may be putting on something that may be irritating their immune system, possibly suppressing their immune system, or even worse, activate their immune system in the wrong way, causing autoimmunity. The bottom line is there's going to be a trade-off for sun protection. To know what you're trading for is crucial, whether it's in your sunscreen, makeup, lotions, or whatever else you're putting on your skin, especially if you're going to do it every day over a large surface area. Your skin is a vital immune organ, and far too many people are irritating it or suppressing it in their quest to protect it. The damage that can be done when you put the wrong stuff on your skin can be far worse and last longer than the duration of that skincare product. Now, when you go to the store, you're going to have a choice between lotions and sprays. And between the two, I would never buy a spray sunblock on myself or on someone else or be near anyone spraying sunblock because you're going to inhale some of those particles in your lungs. Now, remember how I mentioned air pollution prior? Hi, friends. I am so thrilled that you want to take charge of your health and take charge of your food. Now, I know nutrition can be complex, but it doesn't have to be. And I'm here to support you in this lifelong journey. So if you point your camera app to this QR code, it'll take you to a link for a free handout that I created just for you. And if you like it, if you want to see other handouts, please go to the link in my show notes, and then you can leave me your feedback on what I could do to help you in your journey. Okay, back to the video now. People with sensitive lungs can exacerbate lung symptoms when they inhale sunscreen. And however, just because you don't have sensitive lungs today, doesn't mean you're not going to get sensitive lungs if you do this every day. Your lungs are already inhaling a bunch of air pollution from car exhaust, factories, dust, cooking fumes. There's no need to add aerosolized sunscreen. For many people, their indoor air quality is worse than the outdoor air quality. So open your windows, ventilate every day, especially if you're going to be spraying any sunscreen. The other problem with sunscreen sprays is that it doesn't concentrate on your skin. Have you noticed it's spraying everywhere? The coverage is not actually uniform, which is another reason not to use sprays, and especially don't spray your face. Keep in mind, minerals like titanium dioxide and zinc oxide are chemically made into nanoparticles in these aerosols, which is a problem if you inhale those nanoparticle minerals. That potentially can be carcinogenic. And as you can tell, I'm not a fan of chemical sprays. And on top of that, the sunscreen sprays were the ones that are most heavily contaminated with a carcinogen called benzene, where lots of products got pulled off the shelf. Now, granted, even those elevated levels, you're still getting relatively low exposure. But benzene is not something that I personally want to collect. It's like mercury. There's no need to collect it. Benzene causes immune blood cancers in high doses, such as acute myeloid leukemia. But it's also been linked to acute lymphocytic leukemia and chronic lymphocytic leukemia, multiple myeloma, and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And to be fair, many sunscreens, whether they are sprays or solids, were found to have detectable benzene levels. And it's not just benzene, it's also benzophenone. These chemicals will not be found on your sunscreen labels because they don't belong in the sunscreen. These are compounds introduced in poor manufacturing through chemical reactions with other ingredients in the sunscreen. However, with time, as sunscreen sits on store shelves or in your car or cupboard, they can actually build up even more toxic chemicals. You know, all the major brands have been affected: Coppertone, Banana Boat, Johnson & Johnson, Neutrogena, and Aveeno. They've all had product recalls due to high levels of benzene. And this doesn't mean that all of their products are contaminated. It just means that even big labels can have benzene contaminate their products. Consumer Labs tested 50 sunscreen products purchased in 2021, and 80% contained at least trace levels, if not higher, of benzene. Now, no one quite knows how benzene gets there, but it's suspected that there is a reaction with ingredients such as butane, isobutane, or propane, which are the propellants used in aerosolized sprays. Now, I know some people will think that I'm fear-mongering because benzene is found in many more propellants like cooking oil spray, hairspray, or inhaling car exhaust. Yeah, just because that's true doesn't mean we need to super expose ourselves to these things. Obviously, these things are not healthy. So there's no need to add on one more ingredient to your benzene list. Like I said, these sprays should be outdoors if you need to use it. I stopped hairspray because I realized it was so toxic. Nobody will argue that these products don't belong in your body. Now, the argument is in the dose. How much can the body tolerate? And at the doses that you're getting in sunscreen, it hasn't proven to cause cancer. The problem is very few things are literally proven to cause cancer. And technically, even tobacco use isn't proven to cause cancer. They're just associated. The FDA guidance suggests that there are no levels of benzene that is considered safe, and benzene is not permitted in any product. But once it's there, sunscreen turns out to be particularly good at increasing the absorption of benzene, which is a carcinogen, whether it's absorbed through your skin, your eyes, or inhaled in your lungs. Doesn't that suck? You're trying to protect yourself from a carcinogen, which is UV light, but then you may be trading it for another potential carcinogen. The good news is there are plenty of products without benzene. Now let's talk about minerals versus chemical-based sunscreens. By the way, all sunscreens are technically chemicals. Mineral sunscreens are just inorganic chemicals, whereas chemical sunscreens are called organic chemicals or chemicals with carbon. It's not like organic food. They're all synthetic chemicals, these chemical sunscreens. There are two kinds of mineral-based sunscreens, titanium dioxide and zinc oxide. They protect you from UV radiation, also by absorbing the UV rays, just like chemical sunscreens. There's really very little difference. Now, between the two mineral sunscreens, I would prefer zinc oxide, as some studies have shown that titanium dioxide formulas with 5% don't protect against UVA rays as well as zinc oxide. Now, mineral-based sunscreens requires that you apply until you're white, whereas chemical-based sunscreens sort of disappear on your skin. So many people don't apply enough mineral-based sunscreens to be protective. Now, you notice that there are products on the market like zinc oxide in your baby diaper rash cream. They are great products, and they will give you some sort of protection, but they're not designed to give you complete coverage like sunscreen. So if you want to use zinc oxide as a sunscreen, you should buy one specifically formulated to be a sunscreen. In general, mineral-based sunscreens, they don't protect as well as chemical-based sunscreen. So some people have used SPF boosters as an inactive ingredient. SPF boosters are chemicals that may not have been studied as vigorously and thoroughly, and some of these chemicals are very closely related to the ones on the active ingredient list. So this is kind of a manufacturing labeling game. Just be aware of that if you're going to be buying mineral sunscreens with higher SPFs. People like mineral-based sunscreens because it can't pass your skin, so your body won't absorb any of it, at least not the mineral part. The inactive ingredient, that's a different story. If we're just talking about the minerals have less immunological reactions, so they are less skin irritating, and there's less skin sensitization. In fact, the FDA doesn't require any systemic studies because they don't think that these minerals would penetrate the skin. Organic chemical sunscreens, or chemicals that are carbon-based UV filters, are really supposed to be fairly safe. Now, like I said, chemicals listed on the active ingredient list, they have been studied and it's regulated, whereas chemicals in the inactive ingredient list, like SPF boosters, are not as regulated, and they can have very similar structures and potentially similar properties as those in the chemical active ingredient list. I know it's very confusing. I was confused myself. And lots of times the inactive ingredient list is a whole lot longer than the active ingredient list. So you can have unwanted skin reactions to any chemical on the active or inactive list. Many organic chemicals are absorbed in the bloodstream. However, safety data in other countries say that the amount is so little that there is no known long-term health consequences. The key word is known. Many of these chemicals have not been around for more than a couple of decades. And just like any prescription drug, lots of things may come out with time. And as a reminder, organic in this sense is referring to the official chemical term to tell a chemist that these molecules have a carbon atom. This has nothing to do with organic food labels. Remember, when you're buying a sunscreen, you're buying synthetic chemicals. The goal is to find the safest one. Now, I mentioned how sprays, they don't go on uniformly, they pollute your air, and they also have propellants that can turn into benzene, a carcinogen. But just because you avoid sprays doesn't mean you're going to avoid benzene in solid sunscreens. A compound known as octocrylene can degrade over time and become benzophenone, which is considered to be a carcinogen, a mutagen, and an endocrine disruptor too. However, in the amounts used in sunscreen, it is generally considered safe. Of course, the dose is in the poison. Like with anything in life, the more you use, the more surface area you expose it to, the more you get. Old expired sunscreen can accumulate more benzophenone, and also the chemicals separate so that they won't have an even spread on your skin to give you that protection. I recently found a bunch of sunscreens in my bathroom just the other day that were several years old. I think one was like 10 years old, and it totally separated. Turns out that benzophenone was also once patented as an herbicide. Now, the degradation of octocrylene becomes benzophenone, and unfortunately, there are over 3,000 chemical sunscreens currently on the US market with the ingredient octocrylene. And some people do get acute reactions to the sunscreen. Sunscreen is immunogenic. So if you get a contact dermatitis or a rash from rubbing on sunscreen, you should turn it around and see if it contains octocrylene. That may be the reason why you're having a reaction. And if you leave your sunblock in extreme heat, let's say in your car, you can rapidly triple, quadruple the amount of benzophenone in that sunscreen. Therefore, it's best to protect your sunscreen from extreme temperatures. The heat not only makes chemicals separate, but you can potentially accumulate toxic byproducts. So this means when you're at the beach, if you have a cooler, put your sunscreen in the cooler. Don't leave your sunscreen in the car, put it in your purse so that it can keep cool, and just keep your purse in the shade as much as possible. I found this Australian regulatory guideline for sunscreen, and they actually permit octocrylene, and so do the European Commission up to 10%. I believe they've been using these ingredients for about 20 years. Oxybenzone is another common ingredient that is known to be absorbed in the skin and associated potentially with having endocrine disrupting effects, especially in children. It is true, oxybenzone has been found in human breast milk, in amniotic fluid, in urine, and in blood. And of course, all of this sounds very concerning. Both the European Union and Australia, they still allow both of these ingredients, but in limited amounts. The European Union lowered the allowable amount of 2.2% maximum in body products and 6% in face products, which is the same amount allowed by the FDA. Now keep in mind, oxybenzone is also used in other things such as perfumes, lipsticks, hairsprays, and conditioners. It's used as a photo stabilizer or fragrance enhancer. So if you're getting this in multiple products, then of course your levels will build up faster. And the more often you apply your sunscreen, which is supposed to be every 2 hours, and the more surface area, the more oxybenzone you will absorb. Of course, people are worried about the carcinogenic and potential endocrine disrupting potential. But at this time, there's no conclusive evidence that it does either. However, what people aren't thinking about is the immunogenic potential in activating potentially autoimmune conditions. Now, I haven't seen evidence of that, but there's so many chemicals out there. And if you're struggling with controlling an autoimmune disease, then you may want to think about what you're putting on your skin, including your sunscreen. I doubt it's going to help the situation. Now, I'm not saying that oxybenzone triggers autoimmune conditions, but your immune system is very sensitive, and even tiny amounts of chemicals can trigger it to turn on or off in the wrong ways. So if you're purging your diet and purging the chemicals out of your processed food, you should also consider what you're putting on your skin. Oxybenzone is a known allergen for people with pre-existing skin conditions. So if your skin is open, whether it's from dry skin, from eczema, or having a wound, you will definitely absorb more of whatever you're putting on your skin than if your skin was closed. Oxybenzone causes photosensitivity in certain people. So for anyone struggling with any kind of skin condition, be very cautious when you are using oxybenzone containing products. Like I said, the dose makes the poison. So here's a list of FDA acceptable chemicals and their amounts. Now these are all chemicals, so they all have different allowable amounts, and they all interact with your system differently. The good thing about sunblock is that they actually list the percentage of these ingredients in the active ingredient list. And when you're buying sunscreen, it's not like you're buying food. This stuff is not natural, right? It's designed to block UV radiation. And remember, just because it's made for kids, it doesn't mean it avoids chemicals that can be systemically absorbed. Sunscreens are truly chemical concoctions. And if you want to minimize your use of sunscreens, then you have to be selective at when you go out. Hence, check your UV index. You also have to have other forms of shade. For example, I wear UPF protective clothing. This replaces sunscreen for me. That's actually what I personally choose to do because I don't want to put chemicals on my skin. Now, you have to wear these clothes, so any place that you don't have clothing on means your skin will be exposed to UV radiation. And don't forget, it's not just the sunlight overhead, it's also sunlight that's reflected off of objects, buildings, asphalt. Remember, light reflects off of surfaces, so it's important that you keep that in mind. And when you buy UPF clothing, they have different rating systems. 15 to 24 is considered to be good, 25 to 30 is very good, and over 40 is excellent. I try to buy clothes that have a UPF rating of 40 or over, but that also gets expensive. Today, there are many different types of quick drying synthetic fabrics that are quite comfortable to wear as t-shirts, pants, and hats. For children, they also have rash guards for swimming, especially because they may not come out of the pool for you to put on more sunblock. And the neat thing about these rash guards is that you don't have to keep putting on sunblock when it's under the rash guard. But when the skin is not protected by the rash guard, for example, a pair of shorts, everything below the pair of shorts won't be protected then you're gonna have to put sunscreen on those areas if you want UV protection. Now, I don't go anywhere without a hat. The hat should be at least 3 inches in its brim and wide enough to give you shade in your face and your neck and your ears. Now, your hair also is a good UV protector, but not everybody has hair that can cover their ears. So when my son was in marching band, you have to have like a military cut. I bought him a hat with ear flaps and a neck flap. And there is one part of UV protection that you can sunscreen, and those are your eyes. It's very important to have sunglasses even if you don't wear corrective vision. UVA can penetrate through your eyes, can harm your macula. So that's why you never want to directly look in the sun. You can burn your retina if you look at it. And the UVB rays are also damaging to your cornea and lens and can contribute to cataracts as you age. And this is especially important when you're skiing because that white snow reflects a lot of UV rays back right into your eyeballs. Now, I mentioned also that sunscreen is an environmental pollutant and can contribute to destroying our aquatic environment, including coral reefs, as the chemicals they precipitate to the bottom of the ocean and can even collect and filter feeders that people eat. So if you're visiting Hawaii, your sunscreen is banned if it contains oxybenzone, octinoxate, avobenzone, and octocrylene. In fact, they only allow mineral-based sunscreens in certain Hawaiian counties. Now, I know there's an ongoing debate on the real impact of sunscreen and its impact on the aquatic environment. If your country is dumping trash in the ocean, then of course sunscreen probably has very negligible impact. However, our ocean is changing so dramatically. It's acidifying, it's getting hotter, it's allowing for more toxic algae blooms and getting sea animals sick. And if these sunscreens are collecting in the sediment, then of course over time, the collection will be higher. It may be several decades before we actually see the real impact that sunscreen has in our marine life. I was listening to a PhD influencer about sunscreens, and the influencer believes that anybody who says chemical sunscreens are unsafe just doesn't understand the science. And I have to respond that the science is limited by time and by people who want to experiment. Sunscreen is basically a bunch of chemicals that people have created so that you can safely play in the sun. I personally don't have a sun job, right? I'm trying to get sun rays, so I can choose when I'm going to go out in the sun. And I know it works, what I'm doing, because many countries in Asia have very low skin cancer rates. Having said that, Hawaii is the state with the highest rate of skin cancer because they spend a lot of time outdoors and they're closer to the equator. And as an Asian, I generally don't do a lot of outdoor activities, especially under the blazing sun on purpose because I don't want to get photo damage. But if you plan to spend time outdoors, you will risk getting skin cancer and photo aging if you don't take protection. Using sunscreen is just one tool, which I don't believe is the only tool or even the best tool, depending on your skin type and depending on what you choose to do in the sun. Unless you're going to be naked in the sun, and then that means you're going to have sunblock. But the one component that too many people underestimate is your body's ability to repair given the right nutrients. And if you want to learn more about that, watch the next video.